Nā mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you all for joining us today for our inaugural V-Vent with guest of honour, Chris Quin, the CEO of Foodstuffs North Island. A very special thanks to our series partners IBM and Commonwealth Bank of Australia for their support, and a warm welcome to your guests with us today. The Circle's new virtual briefings program is committed to ensuring business continuity and connectivity between people under the theme of resilient leadership in challenging times. Given the significant role of supermarkets in these unprecedented times, we are delighted to have Chris as our first speaker in the series. Chris, on behalf of all of us here, as well as New Zealand, thank you for the amazing work you and your teams are doing and for making the time to speak with us today. It's brilliant to have over 300 guests with us today, and we welcome our members from Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. A reminder that today's V-Vent is on the record and is being recorded, which will be available later. Some quick housekeeping. You can submit questions through the Q&A channel at any time, as well as upvote those that you particularly like. We will conclude at 1:30 p.m, and just prior to this, you will receive a short business sentiment poll that we invite you to complete. Following this, our founder and managing director, Johnny Weiss, will propose the vote of thanks and close the V-Vent. I'm now pleased to introduce our moderator, Julie Hazelhurst. Julie is a life and business strategist inspiring strategic change management and high-performance culture. Julie led a large transformation portfolio in one of New Zealand's leading banks in a general manager role and understands organisational design for the future of the workforce whilst maintaining balance and overall well-being. Thank you, Julie, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Sharron. And wow, what a privilege to be moderating the inaugural Resilient Leadership Series. For many years now, business leaders globally have been grappling with the future of work, what digitization will mean, and how they will respond and disrupt themselves and their industries, and in turn have been preparing themselves for agile thinking, a growth mindset. And here we are thrown into that future of work here and now, unprecedented disruption. And we are seeing leaders step up worldwide, making decisions today with limited facts, the world unfolding daily, that obviously impact people today and into the future. It is therefore no surprise that we've asked Chris to join us in this honest, raw conversation around his thoughts and how he's showing up for New Zealand today. So this might be messy, not you, Chris, of course, but the medium and how we walk through this conversation. But I'm sure, like all the guests, we're super excited to hear from you. So I will kick off question number one. I think at the forefront of everyone's mind is, where are you dialing in from today, Chris?
So I'm at home in the study. You'll see the Charlie the Grocer behind me. Trust me, that was just stuck on the wall with blue tack about a week ago when TV stuff started to happen from here on Zoom or on Skype on an iPad, which is sort of the world we're all in now. Every time I do one of these, I hope the blue tack doesn't give up and he doesn't dive off the wall while we're talking. But that's where I am. So at home, it's one of the things that you wrestle with is, as a leader, you'd like to be running around all of your sites and all of your people and being seen and doing the things that you would normally do. And yet, two things. One is my best job isn't doing that stuff. And secondly, I've got to set a great example of what we're trying to achieve together with this method of living and of working and operating. So, it's hard. And you mentioned it, this future of work thing, it turned up overnight.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you. We won't ask what's on the bottoms, of course, but you said, how you're showing up and role modeling, and you are known for your leadership across New Zealand, your thought leadership, and how you do role model every day. Hallmarks of that for you is about connection and clarity and action. Mm-hmm. Talk us through the last 2 to 4 weeks and how some of those pillars have been playing out.
Yeah, look, it's, you go through, if you even go back, say, 5 weeks. So the beginning for New Zealand was the announcement of the first COVID-19 case. Happened on a Friday night felt like 6:30 p.m. It started to burst into the news. And literally within an hour and a half, we were under siege in our grocery stores and our retail brands. Because a segment of the community had reacted to that and had decided that they were all about to be locked down without warning and panic buy it. And that, you know, that evening set it off. We were in crisis management team by the next morning, and managing through 3 or 4 days of, you know, completely unexpected from a size of reaction point of view, and timing. And you know, if I look back through the 5 weeks, we've had 2 periods of being in crisis management team, and we're now in a period that I would call, we just have a new business. We have a new strategy, we have a new reset, we have a plan for the calendar year, because that's the rhythm you've got to settle into. The staying in touch, look, the one thing New Zealanders certainly have been pretty good at is crisis management. We've had, we've had earthquakes, we've had events, we've had tragedies such as March last year in Christchurch. We've had those things, and we've got into a good rhythm. We practice it and we discipline it. And you know, what I love about our set of leaders is that they're very good at going straight into that mode and being very dutiful about how they do it. So that's pretty good, going straight into crisis management mode. The challenge for us as leaders, I think now, is how do you think ahead to the days, weeks, and months? Because that's what has to be done. It's easy to stay in the adrenaline mode. Easy is probably the wrong word, but that's a natural thing. The unnatural thing is taking the time to look ahead.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And just picking up on it, because that conversation, not only for business owners, but for people, you know, stuck at home under these level 4 restrictions, it is that sustaining that level of energy and focus. Any advice, you know, in terms of seeing this as a marathon and not a sprint as the adrenaline falls by the wayside?
Yeah, I mean, there's some disciplines, right? So we you know, I run a calendar for my leadership team. They have to have a stand down day where they are unavailable 1 day in 7. And I think one of the drugs you get on during this time is the devices. You know, that email has to be answered now, that thing has to be checked. You know, one of the things you immediately see is the overload of messaging. So, you know, across LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and then all the business channels, it's just coming at you like a fire hose. And one of the things you've got to very quickly determine is what stuff am I going to deal with and what stuff am I just going to let lie. Getting people to actually go to work and leave work, because, you know, look, we accept, you know, we've got teams doing 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day. We are, you know, that's the physical team, stores, warehouses, supply chain, transport. We are in a similar mode, but emotionally, it's really important to leave work. And what's showing up now for people is the place they can work at home might be a kitchen table, it might be a kitchen bench, it might be a piece of the lounge, you know. And so how do you actually physically and mentally arrive at work and leave work? So, you know, I try and still have a plan for the day, still try and, you know, it's a longish day, but, you know, it always has been for most leaders, you know, of this sort of role. And also have a time where you stop. You know, I'm not brilliant at it. I'm lecturing my team to do things I'm not doing personally. But, you know, you've got to at least start. My first stand down day for 4 weeks will be Wednesday. And it's going to be really important to show the team I'm off here for a day.
Brilliant. So to summarize, I think that's a huge message for all of us, regardless of where you are. Set your environment up so you can compartmentalize, work from home, and stay really disciplined. And great to hear you're having a day off on Wednesday. I'm sure everyone on the call would agree it's well deserved.
My team will be relieved.
And hopefully your family too. Look, we're still waiting for, you know, please send in your questions, but I have enough to keep us going for the whole call, as people knew I was interviewing you. So while we wait for questions to come in, I might go on to the next one. That's on my list. And you spoke in your sort of initial introduction around moving straight into crisis management mode and then coming up with a strategy and a plan. Again, you've spoken a lot about your style of decision making, deep consultation and engagement across your co-op, balanced with agile decision making in the moment, which is often characterized by know enough and move on. How do you manage that at the moment?
Yeah, and look, and a co-op is a complexity that adds to that, as well as the fact that in New Zealand we have 2 co-ops who are, you know, sister organisations is probably the best way to describe it. So, you know, I've always talked about in a co-op, I think perfection is about getting the right balance of depth of consultation with agility of decision making, knowing when to be in which mode. This situation has shifted quite a few things into agility of decision making. So, the thought of quietly working 428 independent businesses through an option or a thought or a decision, you just have to trust that you can take license quite differently at a time like this. Our operational advantage is our local owners. So in a situation like this where you're trying to present the very best offer you can to your customers in a very challenging situation, our agility on the ground where the owner knows where they can get stuff from, how they can make things happen, where people come from, and are not waiting for instructions from head office, but are working to some principles and some values, that's our chance to be better for our customers. That model works. So we have to reinforce the model. But then even in the last 24 hours, we got presented with a couple of challenges, right? So the mood of the public shifts quickly from, our guys in stores and our guys in supply chain are heroes for keeping stuff on shelf, to why aren't you people paying your people more? How are you treating your vulnerables? And what are you doing with prices? And it happens like that because we saw those coming. We had them in our stages of engagement. We knew it would come, but picking the timing is always interesting. And you stand back from it and go, yesterday between, I think, 6 a.m. and about 12 p.m., we had made decisions that are in the realms of tens of millions of dollars to make commitments that got us back to a leadership position through a couple of audios with boards and some good management trust that we would do the right thing, communicated it to our members and to the public by 4 p.m. So that's agility. I wish every day I could make decisions that, it would be that easy. And then you've got to do the engagement piece, because I need every one of our leaders who operates a store understanding why we've done what we've done and standing for it in their community. So the basics don't change, but certainly the mix has shifted fast because it needed to for this situation. And that need to get engagement behind it and execution behind it doesn't change. Corporates are different because you believe you can issue an email and everyone will do what they're told. I think in a day of millennial leaders and of interpretive leaders, I think it's actually nowhere near that simple. You've still got to engage people in the mission.
Brilliant. A couple of themes you've alluded to and actually deep dove into in that part of the conversation are very much around the themes that are starting to come through. So let's pick up on the criticism, how the public sentiment changed on supermarkets profiteering in this time. You said how you responded. What else are your thoughts on that sentiment?
Yeah, so look, I guess first thing you've got to do is don't try and fix what you can't fix. So their perception that we are growing our profits hugely from the 4 weeks of demand overload, it is not a fact, and it's not a fact base. There is no point in us trying to fight that, because you end up in a right-wrong conversation with your customers, and there is no winning that. You've got to go to really what they care about, which is what they care about is, are you helping me? I'm scared, I'm worried. This is both a medical and an economic impact. So we're very in the medical, but the economic is building. There are lots of people's organisations who have stopped dead. There are incomes that are going to dry up. There are impacts that are scary for people. What they need from us is, our customer-driven commitment does not change during this time. What they need from us more than ever is a reassurance that we are going to look after value for them as much as we possibly can, and a reassurance that, we're not going to come out of this as the super profiteers. It's been 4 weeks, 5 weeks. We don't even have our first month's accounts complete to know what impact it's had. What I do know is we've paid more overtime than I've ever seen in the business, and we've hired 1,000 people to keep up. Somewhere in amongst all this, the cost picture will become clear. We haven't thought about it for a second because we've just said, the 2 rules from the start were safety and well-being of our people and customers, and having groceries on shelf and available to assure New Zealanders. They were the rules. We had 4 guidelines, which are, about, it's about New Zealand and it's about customers and our job to do. It's about the safety and well-being of our people. It is about doing what we need to do to get New Zealand through this. And then the last one was that we keep our balance sheet strong enough to be surviving through this and being able to offer a service. Nowhere on the list of principles is profit. So, and again, public won't believe us if we stand up and say that. Well, we've got to stand up and say something that matters to them. So, even in the last 24 hours, we've gone out very clearly and said the brand that offers the lowest food prices, our Pack and Save, our discounter brand, that is still there. We can prove it. Every day for 6 weeks now, I've been getting a daily essential items price report across all of our stores, and that's how I satisfy myself at a governance level that we are not doing the wrong thing. We still run within about 2% of the number of specials we've always run. The only issue we've got is you can't special something you've got no stock of. And we do a basket of goods tracking, and it's moved $1 or $2 a week up and down based on fresh product pricing. So I can then, hand on heart, stand up for the organisation and go, look, that's what we're doing. Those are the things we think matter to customers. It also matters to politicians because, of course, we've got fast-moving pools of influence right now. So we've got customer sentiment. And people have got a lot more time to sit at home and read social media, which is a thing no one should ever do. But the media have only got 2 subjects to talk about: coronavirus and supermarkets. There's nothing else in the news. And the politicians go from relying on us to keep calm to, you know, being able to score political goodwill from having a go at us if the population want them to do that. And what's important through all of that is accepting, you know, you're almost never going to have a time where everybody's happy much of the time. Just stick to your values, focus on the big things, get in front of the issues, don't deal with them in little bits, but pick big issues, make big statements and move to your next one. Because you don't have the time while you're keeping up with all of this to deal with them one by one. And perception is critical. Reality is not that important.
Yeah, brilliant. Wow. Another layer there, and pretty exposed for you, as you say, supermarkets in this current world. Some of the questions you spoke about sticking to your values at this stage, and some of the questions coming up through the live chat is around other businesses. What advice have you got for businesses not as in the limelight as yours at the moment, or essential services around advertising or promoting what they've got? Any advice or counsel?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, so just be incredibly tuned into where customers are at and you know, come back to principles. So we said safety and wellbeing of staff and customers is number 1. Number 2 was assuring New Zealanders through having groceries on shelf and making it possible to deal to the bottom of Maslow's triangle, right? So the basic needs. You then go to, we've got to really, you know, we are the organisation where the most human interaction is occurring right now in the country. Okay. So our disciplines about retail trading and what New Zealand refers to as alert level 4, it is critical that we be a leader in implementing those. And you do feel like you're everybody's nana when you're going 2 metres, when you're implementing all these things. Yet, if we are to have a chance to come through this in a period of time that is as short as is possible, we've got to do our job. So I thought about you know, what would be 3 things I would say to businesses. And, you know, it's so different, right? So a very close friend of mine is CEO of a travel company, right? His day is fundamentally different to mine, right? Because he is dealing with a complete lack of business and how he rescues what he can, how he manages and helps people through it, how, you know, just, it is horrific. You know, so the first thing is, I'd say, understand the phases and plan for them. So you can't just deal with this week. You've actually got to think about the phases that are coming. And as leaders, we've got to be ahead of the moves. You know, we see it as demand overload. We're still in that. We have what I would call the resource limitation phase and limited trading phase. We're in it, and those 2 are overlapping, and we've got to deal with the fact they're overlapping. And our number of people in isolation, our number of people nervous to work is growing every day. So we're sort of balancing those. The second thing is, it's not just about your company or our company, it is about the country. You know, we've got to, as a country, start to look for the ways to get through this and what shape we're going to be in afterwards and think about that. And the third thing was, you've got to be the best leader you can be and be braver and trust your instinct more than ever. And pragmatism really matters. You know, like we saw a whole lot of clamouring, for example, for an essential services shopping hour, you know, and these things always come from people who aren't the people who need it. They're the observers and the do-gooders and the people who have an opinion about what you should do. And you always come back to basics, which is, well, I want to do something for a customer, I should go and ask the customer first. So, you know, what we did was, you know, what's happening now in stores, obviously, is lines are forming outside, lines are forming at checkouts, all politely standing 2 metres apart. And an emergency services worker, so whether it be police, fire, ambulance, DHB, hospital nurse, turns up, you know, they've worked a long shift, they want to get a job done, go home and sleep. So all we said was, show us your ID, go to the front of the queue, do your shop, show us your ID, go to the front of the checkout. No need to change your operations, no need to tell them to fit to our schedule, just a pragmatic, what we think is a pretty Kiwi approach to some basic things like that to go. And we've had some great stories of people in stores seeing it happen and applauding those people. So it's pretty cool.
Brilliant. I want to pick up on a few of those points there and again summarize some of these questions that are coming through. I get so excited to listen to you, I don't actually look at the questions, so forgive me, everyone. People, the constant theme of what you're saying is customers and your employees first, health and safety. A lot of questions around how you're managing, because you've got your work from home support staff, I'm sure, that you're managing on a day-to-day basis, but you are now the front line, essential services. What are some of the strategies you're using? And the second part of this question, which I'll take into the next slide, is this concept of crisis and opportunity. I know a lot of people are saying, you know, this crisis is bringing opportunities. How are you communicating with those two sets of your employees to keep them jollied and looking ahead?
Yeah. So look, two very different sets of employees. You know, roughly in my support centre organisation, 900 people who work at desks and offices. The days fly by now, but pre-New Zealand going to alert level 3 and 4, so it might have been the Friday, that was a Monday, I think, from memory. On the Friday, we, in our crisis management team, said, look, our read on the situation is enough now that we should empty the office. We had fortunately, in the last 2 or 3 years, invested in going to an almost entirely cloud environment. So literally, people left the office on Friday with their gear. On Saturday, a crew of IT people came through and stripped all the screens of all the desks, put new ones on and boxed up the screens and left them in a contactless pickup point for people. Monday morning, we went from 900 people in the office to 15. Wow. And you know, there has been little individual things, but almost nothing not working for people from a working from home point of view. So you go, tick, that's that dealt with. You then go to our stores and our supply chain, which are physical and location critical work environments. You can't do the job anywhere else. And this sort of connects a little bit to governments and government agencies when you're going through this, right? Because you'd like to think you can turn to government and go, right, give us the rules. What makes it safe to work in our warehouse? What makes it safe to work in our stores? And they have no idea. And the answer, you know, probably because they haven't written a book about this before. They're scrambling as fast as they can. So you pretty quickly go, look, we get the principles. We think we understand enough about the science of how this thing transmits between people. We'll design our process and get on with it, then keep checking in with you and bring you with us. And that's what we've been doing. So, you know, for example, right now, Ministry Health guidelines would say you don't need to wear a mask to work in a retail store environment. We would know that the balance of psychological well-being would be, it's better for our people to have that available to them. And literally tomorrow morning, several million arrive and they'll be distributed to our people. And the same in our warehouses. We try to treat frontline store staff and warehouses with the same discipline because they're in the same level of human contact. We make it fun but focused around the 2 metre apart. You know, and there's all sorts of stuff people are doing that's cool to remind people about that. But you've got to keep going. And my concern right now is we're on day 5. Yeah. We'll relax and in 2 weeks' time start to have some bad habits. So we're going to have to find ways to rejuvenate this way of working. You know, I get emails from a lot of concerned parents who have teenage kids working in retail stores. And you know, we've got to keep pointing them to, here's the guidance we have from the experts. We're living by that. That is our minimum standard. Here's the things we're trying to get done to lift above the minimum standard. And then the other thing we clarified in the last few days, if people are vulnerable, and that's a definition that's, you know, been moving about and we've been trying to wrestle to the ground, we will let them be home and be paid for the period of this lockdown. It is just the right moral thing to do. So that's, you know, some of the how you manage safety. We've been incredibly lucky in the period of 5 weeks. Many people will be familiar with the expression LTIFR, lost time injury. We have only had 2 in a supply chain that's been running at 2 to 3 times the volume of normal. Wow. And nothing, you know, the most serious being a semi-concussion from banging your head on a piece of racking. Very, very grateful that people have kept their heads while working at 2 to 3 times the rate.
Thank you for that. Work from home, and this is a topic, and it's coming up right up towards the top of our live chat. Mental health. I mean, you said earlier today, we're sort of in the adrenaline, we're settling in weeks 2, 3, and 4. How are you thinking about it as an organisation?
So look, you break it into the technical and the cultural and the self-care. You know, it starts for me with leaders. You know, New Zealand and Australia has a very similar safety regime now. You know, New Zealand picked it up from Australia and it's been a good thing. And, you know, you start with, as a leader, I'm accountable for the safety and well-being of my people. The situation has changed, the challenges have changed, but I'm still accountable. So you start with that sort of belief and mindset and then go, okay, in this situation, how do I make sure they're safe? So where are they and who are they with and how are they managing their self-isolation and live in your bubble guidelines? Secondly, you know, physically, are they set up well enough? You know, there's going to be a whole set of new issues because we're not working at properly designed spaces and locations. And then mentally, and what we've seen pretty universally is people are learning how to manage and lead in this environment, but also learning how to have the morning tea, the cup of coffee, the congratulations, you know, an hour ago, we had one of my general managers, me and one of his team on a similar setup to this, on a Skype call, and we appointed him to a more senior position, congratulated him, made him the offer, celebrated why, you know, wished all the best to his family. It's what we would have done in person, but we're doing it this way around now, but also carrying on the good stuff. My team, my direct report team, my leadership team, we've got a little group that is private because there's silly stuff that goes on it and I don't want anyone else to see it. You know, and there's a little thing where we share the what's tonight's song for 6 p.m. and what's the drink, because we have a Liquorland business. We've got a guy who's expert on cocktail of the day. And it's just, you know, it's keeping the humanity when you're not in touch with humans.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's going to be a big topic is, you know, people that are so busy suddenly thrown into not as busy they may be working, but, you know, where's their sense of purpose and identifying with their work? So I'm sure that will unfold as we go, and great to hear how you're approaching it. There's a question which I'm going to read out word for word, which a lot of the audience are interested in. And I think it comes back to, you know, for years you've been talking about the future of work and how that's going to change as we're moving to more of a virtual world. So here it is. Presumably this crisis will end at some stage. How much of these changes that you are being forced to implement now, i.e. demand changes, your import supply chain changes, I'm sure they haven't said this, but, you know, the demand for online shopping, et cetera, do you expect to actually be more permanent? And how are you thinking about this in the long term?
So we think there are 4 customer trends that will be more permanent. The first is meal solution, ready to heat, ready to cook. You know, because clearly through no design and no choice, you know, we've had in New Zealand, for example, every takeaway closed, every restaurant, every cafe. You know, if I look at our sales of flour, you know, so baking flour for the last 4 weeks, a lot of people have discovered a skill they probably never had because no one was cooking and baking as much as they seem to be now. And I have a personal complaint because I'm not seeing anything go into the biscuit tin here. You know, it's that has changed, and we think about our business moving from selling components to selling solutions. This is going to be a shift. Secondly, online. A lot of people who have not tried it or would not have tried it before are going to try it during this time and will not go back. So we think that's a permanent change. Vitamins and healthcare. So we're seeing a lot of people thinking about the fact that this is just a time to be generally healthy, and that category is lifting very, very fast. People are going, look, this is not a time to, you know, get the normal flu or to need to go to hospital for any other reason. So how do I look after myself? And the last one would be, I don't know how temporary or permanent this will be, but the level of cleaning, disinfecting, and generally thinking about healthiness of environment and home. You know, those are the 4 we currently see. So we're starting to think about post this, you know, if I'm thinking about space in a store and focus on those things, are they the trends? What else are people going to need from us? So they're just some of the early thoughts. We're getting good data from partners around the world, and we're starting to share some of those. We also made a list of, you know, what are the things that actually you did something, you made a decision, a process unfolded, where you go, actually, that was better. How do I keep that? And we've got a long list of those, you know, and some of them are, you know, it'd be amazing how many less meetings a day we're having. Yeah, you know, we're just getting stuff done. It's amazing how people are being much more generous with their recognition. There's some, you know, one of the things I'd say is self-management as a leader, you know, so you think even more about sleep, you think about exercise, you think about eating well, because you're just not in the same physical movement zone that you were in. You know, alcohol is, you know, it's one of those things where you go, hey, if I have to be on deck and needed at any time, how am I managing myself? You know, you've got to learn, your resilience goes up because you live with the fact that when you're in the spotlight, no one's going to be happy with you all of the time. So some of the things that people say, I keep coaching my team to say, look, when something happens where you go, God damn it, why did they say that? First thing you've got to ask is what's going on for them? Yeah. You know, what is going on for that person at this time? And the other thing that happens to all leaders, I reckon, in a time like this is you get thousands of people who want to help, who have the answer for you. And you appreciate every one of them, but you can't do every one of them by any means. So you've got to have a method of going, thanks, going to take it into account, or that's great, pointed at this person, and not feel bad about it and not feel like you have to follow everything up, because you can't. And people get that. I think people generally do get it. The other big question that happens at a time like this is I look at each little issue and go, do I even need to do a thing about that? Or can I actually let that just sit there and simmer away till it stops and not put the energy into that, because there are things that are more valuable to more people than that.
Yeah, brilliant. So the word leadership and people came up quite a lot towards the end of that. And there's some questions here around how do you strike the balance, Chris, between this is a huge challenge and actually we've got this, people. So that's the first question.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, wow, how do you manage conversations where you've got to let people go? So two questions there, and then I'll hand over to you.
Yeah. So look, the we've got this temptation. We run an audio every morning for 400 store owners. And what happens there is about 15 minutes of that 45 minutes is us just going, here's the updates, last 24 hours, you know, fact, clarity, issue, problem, whatever it is, just banging through those. Excuse me. We're a conversational culture, so we find that best rather than written. Then what happens is you go to open mic and questions. And this is where people cover themselves in glory as to how much of a dick they can be sometimes. Because, you know, you'll get a question that was asked the day before and the day before, and they'll ask it again. And you've got to come back to that. It's okay. Don't know what's going on for you. You know, the thing with the rule we stick to, questions will come up where you'll go, I could make an answer up on the spot to this. Or I could go, great question. I want to make sure I've understood it. I'm going to come back to you in 24 hours with a properly thought out, structured answer. So that cycle of every day is really helping us not give guidance you have to undo and not do things that have to be fixed or changed later, because people can't handle that ambiguity while we're doing this. So that we've got this as an overriding thing. And one of the things that is really important right now is whenever anyone has a situation, we try and point them at the pre-established process. Flow charts are fantastic. You know, like this week we've had our first, a diagnosed COVID-19 individual. Their contract tracing includes they had an hour in your store in this location, so you need to let the store know, right? So that's the thing that's burst in the last 24 hours. We wrote a process for that 2 weeks ago. The first store that gets that panics, because they do, this is new and different and scary. First thing you do is go, right, hop on front of your screen, open up the page that you knew was there, let's talk through the flow, are you okay? All right, and then you tell that example on the call where all the owners are there and remind them to go back and look, because sometime in the next 48 hours to 72 hours, a lot of our stores are going to get that call. So it's always try and bring people back to, we haven't got every incident, but we've got the principle and the process and the flow to deal with every incident. Trust us, it will work.
I have to ask, Chris, there's other questions coming up, but for someone who's spent my entire career, you know, on leadership and looking how people step up, wow. You sit here, you know, with this cool, calm demeanor. How are you managing? You know, you personally, physically, mentally, emotionally, if you could share that with us, thank you.
Fake it till you make it. You really do have to not let things bother you that shouldn't bother you, you know, because it would be very easy to engage with all of the slings and arrows, right? You know, I have a huge frustration with the role the media play at a time like this. I look at the opportunity for good versus the way they execute in a time like this. You know, a little classic, we had a mispriced chicken in a butchery in a store in a Podaki 3 or 4 days ago. You know, the background to this is a butchery team that's been coming in at 4 a.m. 7 days a week to try and keep shelves full for customers. someone forgets to change a weigh scale from kilograms to inches and a fresh chicken goes out at 30 bucks. The media decide that's the evidence of nationwide, brand-wide price gouging and go for it. You know, and you go, is that the purpose of you at this point in time? That's the value you add to this problem? So I find that really challenging. All you can do is go, I guess you're as scared and confused as everyone else. How do I help you get through that? And so, you know, those are the things that you actually find toughest because you know you've got a team who are doing an awesome job and then you get that sort of crap occurring. But you just, you know, then my job as leader is not to engage in the fight. I've got to work out how to get ahead of the fight, prevent the next one, and deal with that one at a umbrella level because I can't fight it at a New World Podokee level. So that's the, you know, that's the sort of stuff. You know, how do you look after self? Like you've always take a breath before you answer, and the power of the proactive care. Like, you know, I'm a pretty structured list sort of person, so. You know, I've just got a list of all of my team. I know when I last talk to them and go, it's been a couple of days, I'm just going to ring them and go, what's happening? Yeah. Because that alone is important enough to do. So, and I think, you know, you do have to look after yourself. You mustn't take in the things you mustn't. You know, my dad gave me a saying a long time ago. He said, if you pass a drunk in the street and they say you're ugly, are you ugly or are they just drunk?
Brilliant.
You know, and so putting things in perspective is critical.
I'm going to just repeat some of the themes I heard there because I think that in itself could be an article that you could share across New Zealand, you know, ways to cope. You said perspective, don't sweat the small stuff. Love that last saying, you know, tolerance of others. I don't say you have to agree with them, but actually to see and be empathetic where they're coming from under stress as well. You know, your obvious vulnerability and honesty is overwhelming. And again, a hallmark of a standout leader. You're focused on solutions, your ongoing communication and connection with your teams, and this proactive self-care and breath. I mean, just breathing, as you say, just calming the mind, phenomenal. Having a list, having routine and making sure you're baking that in there. Wow, great counsel. Taking it back to the business now, as I've read through some of the questions coming through, how do you know when to look forward versus to manage the crisis you're in now as businesses? How do you know when to switch that?
Yeah. Look, I think, you know, if you are the senior, I hate the word, but, you know, the leader of the organization, you have to be looking forward from the beginning. The question really is how much of the resource of the organization do I assign to time beyond the event versus in the event. And that's why this phases thinking for every organization is important. So the phase we're in was demand overload. We're moving into a resource limitation and trading limitation mode, and then there will be a new way of doing business mode. And I think about it like how many people have I got on each phase and when do I shift them to the next phase and place more emphasis on that. Now, so we had a board meeting on Sunday. We had a board meeting last Thursday. I've got one again on this Thursday. You know, I've got some board members going, right, I want to see scenarios for the next 3 years. I want to see the entire plan. I've got to make a choice about how much effort I put into that at this point in time versus going, I'm going to let you down on that because I'm going to deal with this phase at this point in time and be okay with it. So that's the, you know, the sort of thinking that we're going to do. So we're going to have a free-flowing hour conversation about scenarios, but I'm not going to do a deep analysis because my financial team are better spent reassuring our individual businesses who are hitting cash flow issues, who are hitting trading issues, who are trying to work out how to pay people 10% extra because we announced it yesterday. That's where their time is better spent in the last couple of days. So it's just constantly thinking about depth and resource allocation and when you shift people to the next thing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Probably got time for 2 more questions. Something that keeps coming up, though, I think I'll comment on is people are asking around business advertising and how you connect with your consumers. I think you mentioned earlier, though, Chris, just a matter of really understanding where your customers are at. Is that kind of counsel for that?
Yeah. So look, you know, our level of research going on hasn't changed because we've got to hear from customers right now. We've got to know what they're thinking. Yeah. Social media is dangerous because if you think what people say on Facebook is the truth, you know, be very careful. We are, you know, most of our messaging is switched to how to shop safely because the number one thing people need right now is reassurance that they can. You know, that's the thing that's scaring people the most. I'm in a supermarket, there are people around me. Should I be there or not? You know, so we've done quite a lot of work with independent voices, not with our own voice. You know, we've had Dr. Michelle Dickinson as an example. A few people know. She did something on Saturday which just said, look, I'm a scientist, I'm a nano scientist, and here is how I would shop safely. Here's the practices I would follow. Pragmatic, simple, helpful. That's the stuff that we need to share with people right now. They need to see us doing things that make them comfortable to shop. You know, and it's thinking about all of those things right now. Look, you know, advertising how good we are at something, not very helpful right now. Not you know, don't bother. What's happened to most organizations is pre-booked marketing can't be withdrawn, or you can't get, you know, you're not going to get refunded or covered. There is notice periods and stuff for that. So we've had some stuff still running that was just there. But what we're trying to switch it to is, number one is safety, number two is value. So we just keep thinking about the messaging we've got to give to the market right now is those two things. And then there's a little bit of, hey, you can still go shopping, you can still buy stuff you love. Life can be maintained to some extent. Because we don't want to, you know, people thinking that living in your bubble is a black and white experience. It can still be colour.
Yeah, brilliant. Final question, then I'll summarise and hand over to Johnny. How are you connecting with the most vulnerable across New Zealand? Yeah. And I suppose second part, I'm cheeky, I'm putting two questions in one to finish up. You know, talk about some of the coverage recently about your most vulnerable taking special leave, what prompted that? So two parts, how are you connecting with the most vulnerable consumers and then your staff?
Yeah, so step one was making sure you understood, you had a definition of vulnerable that was real. Yeah. You know, we're a supermarket, not an ICU ward, so vulnerability, you know, different definition. Ministry of Health first came out of New Zealand and said 6 words, you know, diabetic, pregnant, words like that. If you just took those words and applied them, we would lose 40% of our workforce. Oh. So you go, okay, you know, first thing, safety and well-being of people. So what really is risk? You know, it's like any safety issue that we all consider, what's the risk? What's the mitigation? So you then go, okay, what really is the risk? We went to the DHBs and stole their material. And, you know, we were working to a standard above what they were working to for someone to work in a COVID-19 ward. So you go, okay, fundamentally a supermarket has less risk of exposure than a COVID-19 ward. So we're then lucky we've got 2 ex-GPs who own supermarkets. So we grabbed them and said, help us write a pragmatic, safe guide for when someone is too vulnerable to be at work. We wrote that, we worked with Ministry of Health and with the Chief Science Advisor at the Ministry there, got an okay, put that out to all our businesses and said, there's the guide, work through this flow chart. If someone is vulnerable at the end of that process, they should be allowed to go home and should be paid for the period of the lockdown. That is the right thing to do. We've also said to all staff, look, if you're still, because what we can't diagnose and we mustn't try is emotional state as much as medical state. So we've also said, if you're worried about being at work, go to your GP. If your GP says this person should be at home, they are vulnerable, we'll accept that and support it. That will probably affect up to 20% of our resources. And, you know, we're just going to have to go, that is the situation. We've got to dig it in and deliver against that. So, and then you go, okay, the other one that came out was sort of funny in some places. There was a clear guidance that said people over 70 should not be at work. They should go home. We have 363 people over 70 years old working in our stores. Some of the most cool and incredible people. We've gone to all of them and said, look, you need to go home. You need to stop working. We will pay you. A small number of them are fighting us on that because they're too proud to go home. They think they're in great health. They want to be at work and want to be contributing. So we're dealing a little bit with, you know, social media people going, oh my God, they're making that 71-year-old stay at work. The 71-year-old's going, screw you, I want to be at work. Yeah. And we're just, you know, I've just had a couple of conversations about that today. And you go, look, you know, if they're healthy and they're in a situation where the risks are very well managed and they're not, you know, on checkout, they're not in front of lots of people, but they're doing a job that gives them self-worth and self-being, are we doing the better thing overall? And this is where leadership judgment will always have to be applied. There are no black and white rules. There are good principles and good values.
Yeah, brilliant. And just very quickly, the connecting with the vulnerable communities, your consumers. Yeah, just to finish that off.
Yeah, so look, really good information flow is key. You know, what's open, when is it open, how can you, you know, and how are we operating? So we've done a lot of, all of the media channels have been full of that. We are, you know, focused, this next 2 or 3 days is all about focus on lifting our capacity for online delivery to vulnerable and isolated, and a system of identification that actually works. I know in Australia, a grocery retailer put out a special system for saying you identify yourself as vulnerable and we'll look after you first. And it got absolutely hammered by people lying about their vulnerability just to get to the front of the queue. So we need to not just copy that problem. We've got to find a way to be more in depth than that. We've got some cool tech stuff going on. So we're working with Google to change the way Google records that a store is busy. So the algorithm learns over time. We need to reset the base of the algorithm so it says actually 100 people in that store is now maximum capacity. So that's when you tell us it's busy. Just those quick things like that. We are working on the ability, we're trialling it today in a couple of stores, to digitally book a physical shopping slot so that you know, okay, I can turn up and do that. I don't know whether that'll work for customers. We're going to try it on a few, see what they say, see if the tech works, we'll have a go. There's some of the quick ideas.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much. I urge you in all your free time on Wednesday to look at some of the Q&A and comments coming through. We've covered as much as we can, but, you know, everybody on this chat is just saying thank you. Chris, you know, a question I think for so many people I'm talking to as a mum, as a you know, a leader, whatever it is how do I want to show up over this period of time? And boy, you're showing and leading the way for us. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us in such an open and honest conversation. That everyone's thank you. I can't tell you, it's all popping up on the screen. I'm going to hand back to Johnny now, who's just going to take us through the poll, and he will finish up the conversation. But thank you for your time. Thank you for the privilege for me to interview you in these crazy, challenging times. Take care.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie and Chris. What a fabulous interview. And thank you, Chris. Incredible leadership. I'll formally thank you in a moment. But we also want to test the mood of our viewers to try and get a feedback in the course of our series on how people are feeling, and we want to track that. So in front of you, we have a business sentiment poll. We've got 3 standard questions which we have across all of our briefings, and then a couple which are appropriate to our speaker. So I'll pass over to Tracy just to put everyone through the paces. What do you do? How do I do it? And we'll read you back and you'll see the poll in a moment. Tracy.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Johnny. I think you'll come up and I can see a lot of you already voting. I'll give you about a minute or even a little less to complete that poll, and then Johnny will summarise the results and you will get them in real time. So it shouldn't be long.
Tracy will report when we've got most of the questions in.
I refuse to play a Jeopardy theme at the moment, but okay, we've got about 3/4 now. So I'll close off that poll in about 10 seconds.
Okay, in the meantime, I'll formally thank Chris for your amazing insights. You know, as Julie rightfully identified, fantastic leadership. You've shown it over many stages of your career. This one is probably your biggest test ever, as for most leaders. And how you've shared with us your insights, both professionally and personally. We absolutely thank you for giving us that privilege. It's been terrific takeaways, a flood of questions that Julie had to handle. You know, it's testimony to the curiosity and the interest that people have, and there's no doubt lots of takeaways that each of us can take. So thank you for making time in your really busy schedule. Over to Tracy.
Sorry, we've just ended our polling and sharing the results now for you, Johnny.
Okay, so how do you feel? You can see the results there. Most people are challenged. Many of you responding. The innovation, 47%. Thankfully, only 1% are scared, and that's gratifying. Everybody's happy generally with how the government, we're talking about both across both countries, Australia and New Zealand. We also have some people from Singapore and globally. So this is more of a generic question, but encouraging to see our faith in the governments. What do we pick in terms of how long? 50% 6 months, 41% 12 months. Okay, we're going to see how that's going to track over the coming briefings. And really look at the retail different section industry differently in the future. Definitely, Chris, some innovation, some new ideas, and you're really reading the public and responsive to what everyone wants. And most of us will be spending more or less about the same with you when we're now, and particularly when we're over it. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating. We had a wonderful response. To Julie, thank you for being our moderator. And above all, to Chris, keep up your incredible work on behalf of all of us in the community. Thanks, everyone, for joining. The series will continue this week, day after tomorrow, with Naomi Simpson from the Big Red Group, followed by Phil Cronican, Chairman of NAB. Why is this crisis different from others I've faced? And a major cybersecurity briefing on Friday with Sir John Key, Director of Palo Alto Networks, with Nikesh Arora, Global CEO. Our series continues next week. We hope you gain benefit. Please give us your feedback. We're here to help. We're here to be a platform for everyone to share. Thank you all for joining us today.